Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Wednesday afternoon. And I'm sorry for being a little bit late because usually I start at 12:30. I got held up in a meeting again, and we were talking about football. We were discussing power rankings. And if you really want to tune into those football takes that we talk about in the meetings, I believe there are several other podcasts that we do that are also going to be uncovering their own power rankings, uncovering their own little lists of what's going on in the NFL. And college football as well. So I highly recommend tuning into those podcasts that we have on football, especially since the sport is in season. It's what makes America run. And of course, if you guys, it's really just one of the more popular sports here. So I highly recommend tuning into those podcast if you guys are interested in football. But since we are the basketball podcast, we're going to be talking about NBA basketball. And the first segment that we're going to cover is Karl-Anthony Towns. Again, we touched on the trade a couple of days ago, but it was later revealed that there was a third team involved in that trade as well that I did not cover in that segment. So I'm just going to touch up on that and explain the entirety of the trade details going into this trade. And then in the second segment, we're going to be covering the WNBA playoff games, just recapping exactly what went down in those games and the big story that I took away from these games and just the score and how the series is shaping, all of that. Then in the third segment, we are going to be talking about LeBron James and his expectations for this upcoming season with the Lakers and with JJ Redick as the new coach. And then in the fourth segment, we're still going to be talking about the Lakers, but this time JJ Redick sort of addressed a big problem that the Lakers have, which I will go ahead and cover in the fourth segment. And finally, we also have a special fifth segment at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that and to figure out exactly what that fifth segment is. Before I begin, however, I do like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, burning question, something you've been dying to share, we're all ears. And if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and it allows you to send in your comments and or donations that way. It really helps the show, and if Super Chat isn't really your thing, that's totally fine. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That's gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or really helps the show. Doesn't matter which one you do. And with that out of the way, let's go right ahead and get into this first segment, which is covering the Karl-Anthony Towns trade. Now, as I said previously in the last segment, the two teams involved in the trade were obviously the Knicks and the Timberwolves. However, there was a third team involved, and I'm just going to go ahead and give the entirety of the trade details. So the Knicks, the third team that was involved, it was Charlotte. The Charlotte Hornets ended up acquiring a couple of picks and a couple of players from the Knicks in this exchange. So in order to complete this big trade, the Knicks and the Timberwolves had to get a third team, which was Charlotte, to sort of absorb some players into their cap space and allow the salaries to match. And we're seeing a lot more three-team trades going around, and we're seeing a lot more sort of balanced trades to try and avoid that second apron or even that first apron with the luxury tax. And I do have a video explaining the second apron and the first apron for any of you guys who are curious about that. I do have that on our playlist, so you can go ahead and find that video if you guys are interested or have no idea how the second apron or the first apron work in the NBA. But essentially, if you go above the if you go above the salary cap for the season, that would be the first apron. Depending on how much you go up by, it depends how much tax you have to pay, which really a lot of owners don't want to do, because not only are they going to have to pay the team, they're also going to have to pay a huge extra amount of sum for going above the second apron, and more so going into the first apron, and then the second apron you have to pay way more. So it's like first apron is, some people find it tolerable. Second apron is where it's really, really bad. And that's basically just a sum up. Again, I have a whole video explaining that. So as a result of this trade, who are the players that the Hornets absorbed into their cap space? Well, the Hornets agreed to take 3 Knicks players, those 3 Knicks players being Charlie Brown Jr., Daquan Jeffries, and DeJuan Washington Jr., alongside 2 second-round picks from New York and 1 from Minnesota. So the entirety of the trade details, like the whole team, like the whole 3-team trade, Karl-Anthony Towns gets sent to the Knicks. Then the Knicks send DiVincenzo, Julius Randle, and a first-round pick over to the Timberwolves. And then the Charlotte Hornets end up receiving the Charlie Brown Jr., Daquan Jeffries, DeJuan Washington, as well as 2 second-round picks and 1 from Minnesota. And that's the entirety of the trade details, according to The Athletic. So as part of the deal, Knicks reportedly acquired the rights to James Njani from the Hornets as well in that exchange. And he is a center from Nigeria, and he was the 31st overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft. And he has been playing overseas recently, underwent back surgery, and is unlikely to play in the NBA this season. So essentially, the Knicks ended up getting nothing in that exchange. But again, it could end up being really good for them, because they do have a problem at the center right now, currently, because Mitchell Robinson is still injured, and it's most likely that he's not going to return until a few weeks. Nostalgic Nick is in the chat. Knicks, yep, I don't know. Speaking of which, since you are here in the chat, how do you feel about this trade? Do you think you ended up winning the trade? Would you have rather had Randle on the team, or do you think Karl-Anthony Towns is a great fit for this Knicks roster? I'm sure you are bitter about DiVincenzo needing to get involved in that trade and going up. And Nostalgic Nick is in the chat responding, saying we needed to give up $80 million. And yeah, that is what you sort of need to sort of avoid that second apron and avoid that luxury tax. So I guess it's like it's something that how should I say this? You don't want to do it because it hurts you personally, but you know it needs to be done. That's sort of how this trade sort of feels like. It's from Knicks fans at least. Now, in the Timberwolves' perspective, I'm still sort of curious how Julius Randle is going to really fit in that system along with Anthony Edwards. I think DiVincenzo is going to be a very solid 3-point shooter for the Timberwolves. And Nostalgic Knicks responding in the chat, we traded Dante at his highest value. Yeah, that is very true. However, the question is Karl-Anthony Towns really worth all of this? That's my question around this sort of trade, because it is a very hefty trade for someone that isn't really that popular of a center. And I feel like the Knicks would have been title contenders anyway without Karl-Anthony Towns, but this does sort of match up pretty well against the Boston Celtics, which is sort of, I'm assuming that's sort of what they're going for here with this trade, to try and space the floor out just as well as the Boston Celtics are able to space the floor out, while still having good defensive matchups against the Celtics, because, let's face it, that team has a very, very dangerous starting five. Anyone can go off in that starting five. And the Knicks, they sent Julius Randle and DiVincenzo on the lottery picks for that trade, and this is basically like the entire trade for the entire finalized trade. And it doesn't really seem like many people are. I don't know if people are scared of the Knicks, like with Karl-Anthony Towns. They weren't really. I wouldn't say they were overly scared of them when they had Randle, but I don't really think adding how should I say? I don't really think adding Karl-Anthony Towns makes them that much scarier, if that makes sense, compared to when they had Randle and DiVincenzo. I'm not entirely sure how this trade is going to work, but this is sort of going to be one of those trades similar to, ironically, Minnesota's trade acquiring Rudy Gobert. This is going to be seen as like a really big, risky trade that we won't have the full details of whether or not it's good or bad until we actually see it put into practice, until we see how the rotations work, and until we see like how Karl-Anthony Towns actually fits in this entirety, in this Knicks offense. Now, I don't know if he's going to try and take on a little bit of a lesser role, considering like the talent that they do have. Jalen Brunson is a phenomenal player, as well as having Mikal Bridges, who can also be a phenomenal offensive player as well. I'm sort of curious to see how Karl-Anthony Towns is going to mesh with that piece. Not to mention the fact that Karl-Anthony Towns, per 100 possessions, at least on the Timberwolves, wasn't all that good defensively. And again, this I said this before in the previous podcast. You're trading a not really good playoff performer again for another not really good playoff performer. So it's like it's really difficult. And yes, it is pick and pop all day, as Nostalgic Nick says in the chat. However, you got to make those threes as well. And like, you know, Karl-Anthony Towns, he is the best big man 3-point shooter. I'm not knocking any sort of disrespect like that. However, in the playoffs, that 3-point shooting and that shooting in general sort of just, for lack of a better term, falls off a cliff. Especially in the last series, where it was like, in the last playoff series that they played against the Dallas Mavericks, it was very, very underwhelming coming from both Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns. And a lot of that had to do with the efficiency that they displayed over on the court. So it's going to be very interesting to see how both of these two favor in their new situation. I do think, however, Julius Randle is probably going to play a lot better in the postseason than the Timberwolves, mainly because of how the media is compared to how the media is in New York. Like, all the attention that you're going to get in the Garden, that brings a lot of pressure. Compared to the pressure that you're going to get playing in Minnesota, not that much. You can make the argument now, however, because of Anthony Edwards and just how popular the Timberwolves have become. But I don't really think all the eyes are going to be on you in Minnesota nearly as much as all the eyes are going to be on you in New York. Like, that's just the mecca of basketball for a reason. So it could, again, I could be wrong. Could end up being good, could end up being bad. We'll see. But those are the full trade rumors. And that's all I have for this first segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the second segment, where I do a little bit of a recap of all the WNBA games, all the WNBA playoff games that went down yesterday. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we are going to be covering or recapping all of the WNBA games that went down yesterday. So before I begin, I do like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, burning question, something that you've been dying to share. We're all ears. And if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You can go ahead and click on the $sign below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. And it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, that's totally fine. You could always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment, gsmcpodcast.net, and then you can go ahead and send in your comments and donations that way. Either or really helps the show and makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is gsmcpodcast.net. You can see it below the ticker right now. And without further ado, let's go right ahead and continue on with this segment, which is going to be about the WNBA games. So, again, with the WNBA, now that Caitlin Clark isn't really, competing or playing in these playoff games, a lot of the coverage has sort of fallen off. And a big part of that, I say this every single time, is that the games are on Sunday. These games should not be on Sunday. Yesterday was all right. Like yesterday having these games, yes, it was a great idea to have these games on a Tuesday when there was no NFL football or college football being played. And even still there was barely anybody that was covering all this because of the lack of Caitlin Clark. Despite that, however, this league is full of fantastic players, and it actually has a what's shaping up to be a rather competitive series between the Lynx and the Connecticut Sun. So I'll go ahead and I'll cover that game first, since right now this is the only series where there was actually an upset going into the in this series. It's the first series in the entire WNBA postseason where there was actually an upset. That happened in Game 1, but in Game 2, the Lynx, which are the higher seed, they're the second seed, and Connecticut is the third seed. They ended up winning at home, and now the series goes back over. Well, it doesn't go back, but the series goes to Connecticut in these next two games. And I do see your comment in the chat, Nostalgic Nick, but I'm going to finish covering this first before I address it. And so the Lynx, they ended up winning 77-70 at home. They really needed this win because if they ended up falling 2-0 in this series, then Connecticut has two home games directly after where they could close out the series. And again, the WNBA playoffs are a best of 5, not a best of 7, for those of you guys who are just tuning in and don't know how the WNBA playoffs work. In the second round, they're best of 5. And it would have been a really bad situation for the Lynx had they lost this game, but they ended up pulling through. It was a very huge upset that the Connecticut Suns ended up winning at home. Again, that hasn't happened yet in this postseason. And the Lynx, like on paper, if you look at the box scores, it didn't really seem like they had that good of a game. Not many people were in huge scoring sums, but then again, the same can be said about Connecticut and the Sun. It's really like a defensive battle between these two teams because both of these two teams are very, very good defensively, more so than they are offensively, which could shape up to be a very interesting finals matchup depending on who they play against. And again, as I mentioned before, there weren't all that many scorers. Like the leading scorer on the team was Courtney Williams for the Lynx that ended up scoring just 17 points in 28 minutes, which is very, very impressive to say the least. And while it doesn't really look like any individual players were outstanding in this game, the team overall shot very good from three. They ended up shooting 42% from three, 45% from the field, which is pretty decent, but you would want a better performance coming in from a lot of these players, especially Nafisa Collier, who ended up forgive me if I messed up that last name, who ended up going 3 for 14 from the field and only ended with 9 points despite playing every single minute of this game. And again, that's not good if you are Minnesota, but at the end of the day, they ended up coming out with a win. Win by a mile, win by an inch, a win is a win. And on the Connecticut Sun side, Alyssa Thomas ended up scoring the most points. She ended the game with 18 points and 10 rebounds in 40 minutes played. Now, the big difference between the Sun and the Lynx in this matchup was the efficiency. The Sun ended up shooting 36% from the field and 25% from three. They ended up going 5 for 20 from three. And if you're going 5 for 20 from three, you're not going to win any playoff series. It's just that simple. They're really a very inconsistent three-point shooting team. And when you take that many threes, you have to make, if they would have made just 3 more three-pointers, then they would have ended up winning the game. And even then, that's not really that efficient, going 8 for 20 from the three-point line. And now the series is going to be played they're going to have 2 home games. It's starting to shape up that Connecticut could actually start make the upset and like make the upset possible and advance into the finals. Now, if the finals is going to be consistent of the Liberty and Connecticut, that is going to be a very huge conflict of interest, because if you guys have been tuning into this podcast for a while, I am a huge fan of New York because, you know, I grew up around near that area. However, now I'm staged in Connecticut because that's where I go to college, and this is a local team, and it's a big conflict of interest, but I'm going to stick with my gun and stick with New York, obviously, because, you know, New York, it's a heck of a town. But aside from that, the next matchup speaking of New York, the next matchup was the Liberty going up against the Aces. This game was very, very close. It ended up coming down to the wire, and Sabrina Ionescu, along with Brenna Stewart, ended up answering the call, which is what they struggled in the finals last year. And like that was really the big story, because this is a finals matchup. Like, this is a finals rematch that we're seeing between the Aces and the Liberty. And the big problem with them was that they couldn't close out. It seems like they've learned from their mistakes of being unable to close out games, and now they're looking to sweep going into the next game, which is going to be held in Las Vegas. And if they can close out the series, then they go to the finals. Now, Sabrina, as I mentioned before, she closed out the game for them, helped close out the game for them. She ended the game with 24 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists. Fantastic game coming in from Sabrina. Brenna Stewart was a little bit quiet for most of the game, but she made it count in the end, where she hit really clutch free throws when they desperately needed her to. And she ended the game with 15 points, 8 assists, and 7 rebounds, along with 5 for 15 from the field. Again, wasn't that efficient overall, but towards the end of the game is where it really mattered, and that's where she stepped up. And again, it was also like, you know, Sabrina, she hit this really clutch 2-point jump shot that they desperately needed to take the lead as well. Now, the Aces, obviously A'ja Wilson, the best player in the WNBA, ended the game with 24 points, 7 rebounds, and Kelsey Plum, however you pronounce her name, forgive me if I botched it, was abysmal tonight. Last night ended up going 2 for 9 from the field and only ended with 6 points. You're not going to win the game when Kelsey's not playing that well. That's your second option, and you kind of need her to sort of step up her game if you expect to sort of make this series competitive again. And the efficiency overall, it was pretty decent coming in from the Aces. The Liberty were actually way more inefficient from 3 compared to the Aces, but they were still able to win, which tells you a lot about both sides of the team. Like, I mean, the Aces, they did have a chance to win. It's just they couldn't close out against the Liberty. I think the Liberty have way too many offensive pieces for this system. And that's a wrap up on this segment, just recapping all of these playoff games and addressing the comment from Nostalgic Nick, OKC versus the Knicks as the finals. That's who he has going into the NBA finals before the season starts. And honestly, I have no idea. I'm not really all that high on OKC, mainly because of their lack of experience in the postseason. I do know SGA did outplay Luka Doncic, but the rest of the team didn't really step up to help SGA. So I'm not entirely sure exactly whether or not they're going to make the finals. I don't really think they are, just because of the lack of experience that they have playing in the postseason. Again, this was their first postseason that they made, so obviously there's more to come. But still, like, I do need to see a much better showing from the rest of the team, aside from SGA, because SGA played phenomenally in the postseason. And as for the Knicks, again, not entirely sure how the Karl-Anthony Towns trade is going to mesh with this team, not to mention the fact that the Celtics are coming off of a championship already, and you could argue that the Celtics are more motivated to win now, given all of the offseason drama, Tatum being sat out in the Olympics, Jaylen Brown being snubbed in the Olympics, and like all of these other narratives that could push them to repeat again. It's a possibility. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think it's entirely set in stone, but we'll see as the season progresses. So we'll move on to the third segment after this short break, where I talk about LeBron James and his expectations for going into next season, because he did address some of them. So I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be talking about the Lakers, more specifically LeBron James and his expectations going into next season. Now, whoops, wrong picture. There we go. So, as you guys know, LeBron James and the Lakers, they haven't really been all that in the previous season. Since winning the title, there was sort of an expectation that they would be more competitive as the years progressed, but it's sort of been the opposite. Now it's a really big question on whether or not they're even going to make the playoffs, if they're even going to make the play-in, and sort of where they stand. They still sort of have no idea, and the expectations on this team is going to be very high, especially when you have somebody like LeBron James on your team. However, LeBron isn't really sold on the expectations. And what I mean by that, so LeBron James, at least according to this article on Bleacher Report, says that he feels it's unfair to put any expectations on the team as it begins a new year under a new coach, which is a little bit concerning in my opinion, because I feel like if you're a team that has a prime LeBron, yes, LeBron is still in his prime. It doesn't matter what any of you guys think. LeBron is still playing the best basketball that he's played. He's even said that ever since the Olympics, he feels like there's more in the tank. And even after the Olympics, if you really think that he's still not in his prime, there might be something wrong. In my opinion, again, like that's my opinion. But based off of how he played in those Olympics, how he performed in the clutch, how he answered the call when everyone on the team asked him to answer that call, he was him. And he's proven that he has a lot left in the tank. So if you're not a contending team, or if you're not aspiring to be a contending team with a prime LeBron, you are failing LeBron and the rest of the season. And the fact that LeBron himself doesn't have any expectations, I think it's some really, really bad news for the Lakers. He continues going on saying, I don't have any expectations, and that's unfair to put any expectations on us right now. The only thing that we can count on each other is how we come to practice and come to work every day. Again, this is very, very concerning, because if you are... I understand where LeBron is coming from, going into a new coach that has zero NBA coaching experience, zero coaching experience altogether, like professional coaching experience. It's putting expectations on a team with a new coach ideally would make sense. Like low expectations, that would make sense. But you have a prime LeBron with a solid second option with Anthony Davis. I'm sorry, you have to be in competing mode. You have to have you're going to be in the playoffs, you're going to compete, you're going to make the finals in your mentality. It makes sense that he didn't really say that given the previous seasons that they've had and the overall roster with the Lakers, but still, you have to find a way to make that work. I'm sorry to say this, but it has to happen. When you have a prime LeBron, it has to happen. So I'm very, very concerned for this season with the Lakers. If these are LeBron's expectations, if he doesn't have any expectations for this season, how is he going to go into this season? I mean, obviously he's going to try to win every game, but still, like, what comes after that? You know? I mean, let me know in the comments what you guys think. I mean, if you guys have any expectations for the Lakers, because quite frankly, I feel like this Lakers team, like, while it did not change at all over the offseason, the new coaching could end up bringing a new spark to this team. Again, they still have a prime LeBron. So if you have a prime LeBron, I think anything is possible. I mean, there have been several times where I was concerned on whether or not LeBron would actually win this series or win that series or even make it to the finals. And time after time after time, I had been proven wrong. So I never really bet against LeBron, especially when it comes to the postseason, considering how he has the most experience out of anyone in the entire NBA in the postseason. The problem is his teammates. And still, he's proven that he can carry the load. Granted, it might not be easy now, considering, age, but he does say he has a lot left in the tank, so we have no idea. And the article continues. Now, the Lakers need to worry about themselves and figuring out who they want to be, as Redick gathered the team for dinner in Beverly Hills that in essence served to lay the groundwork for the season. And per Max Christie, per Mick, let me see how to pronounce this name, Mick McNanum, forgive me if I completely messed up that last name, it was kind of a first time that we all really got together as a team in one setting. That's what the Lakers guard Max Christie said, according to Mick McNanum. Forgive me if I messed up that last name. JJ and the staff had a big presentation for us about kind of like team values, ground rules, so we can kind of wrap everybody around an identity that we want to have a team, so we're one coherent unit. And teams and players have more than enough to be concerned about internally and don't necessarily need to worry about outside noise, which is what they're going to face a lot since they are Los Angeles and they are the Lakers. And in regards to the James, in regards to the quote from LeBron, Mick McNanum, forgive me if I mess up that last name again, put some more context on it, saying LeBron did his best to shield his team from any premature pressures that could come with optimism surrounding Redick's addition. After all, it stands to reason that with how effective James and Anthony Davis looked at the Olympics, the Lakers returning a core roster that made it to the conference finals 2 seasons ago and adding a new coach, they could be considered contenders, but that label could only magnify any early season growing pains the team could experience. So what he's trying to say is essentially that LeBron said this to try and minimize the expectations from the Lakers, and if you don't have that many eyes on you, then there's less pressure on a lot of the players to perform. So if this is what LeBron was going for, then sure, like, I can agree with this quote and I can agree with why he said that. But if there is genuinely no expectations for this Lakers team coming from your best player, I think that just spells bad news. And it's not like obviously the Lakers are not perfect with LeBron. I mean, they have several problems with the roster that I'm going to address in the next segment. But again, it all falls down to, at least in my opinion, it all falls down to just how far LeBron can take you, how far Anthony Davis can take you, and as well as how the team responds with that. Because that's really a big problem, in my opinion, with a lot of these postseason performances. They do get a lot out of LeBron and Anthony Davis, but everyone else is sort of mediocre or less than mediocre. In fact, D'Lo was horrible in the postseason last year, and that was a big reason why the Denver Nuggets ended up coming back in like a lot of the games that felt like the Lakers had it in the bag. But another argument could be said that, I mean, the Nuggets, whenever you put a Lakers jersey in front of them, they just turn into completely different animals. I don't know what it is. Again, if you want me to do a whole segment on Jamal Murray and his shooting efficiency against the Lakers, I can totally do that, because it's so apparent that it's like, I don't know what it is, but you put a Lakers jersey in front of Jamal Murray or Jokic, and they make some of the craziest shots that you will ever see on the planet. And the true shooting percentage from not just Jamal Murray, but the entire team increases by almost 10% when they go up against the Lakers, which is just a ridiculous stat to think about. But again, I can do a whole segment on Jamal Murray and his postseason performance and just how much better he is against the Lakers than compared to every other team. And it's really like, it's a really bad situation that the Lakers find themselves in. And I'm going to continue that on the fourth segment, where JJ Redick had some things to say about the Lakers and the rotation. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that after this short break and exactly the big problem that the Lakers might have going into this next season. So stay tuned if you guys are interested.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to continue talking about the Lakers and their expectations going into the next season. And we're going to start with a big problem that the Lakers have failed to address during this offseason. So, as you guys might know, the Lakers ended up losing twice to Denver in the postseason, and the biggest problem with that is the matchup against Jokic. Aside from Anthony Davis, there is no real depth at the center position for the Lakers, and they failed to address that in the offseason, where they were expected to get certain centers and certain players that should have made the team better, but they ultimately ended up choosing other teams to go towards. Now, you can make the argument, whatever the case might be, whether those teams have a vendetta against the Lakers, whether those players have a vendetta against the Lakers and don't want to team up with LeBron, regardless of what you say, there is a lack of depth in the center position, and that is a very, very big problem, especially since you keep losing to Nikola Jokic in the postseason. And Anthony Davis, yes, he is a very competent defender, but he cannot guard Nikola Jokic all the time. And he cannot stay in the game all the time, focus on offense, while at the same time trying to stop Jokic on defense. It's very, very difficult to stop Jokic given his offensive repertoire and everything that he brings to the table for the Nuggets. And on top of that, the fact that the Lakers don't have really another competent center aside from Anthony Davis is a serious, serious problem. And it's one that the Lakers failed to address in the entirety of the offseason. Christian Wood and Jackson Hayes, they did pick up their player option, but let's face it, none of those guys are going to be able to guard Nikola Jokic. I mean, at least nearly as effectively as you need them to get stops and get consistent stops. That's just not going to happen. And however, and another thing that also needs to be mentioned is that Hayes is going to be is going to miss the start of the season after undergoing knee surgery. So outside of Christian Wood, I messed up the two of them. Excuse me for that. So outside of AD and Jackson Hayes, the only real depth that the Lakers currently have in the front court are two-way players like Christian Colocu and Colin Castleton and Armel Traore. And I'm sure not many people are going to know who those players are. And that's exactly the problem, because you're going to be putting up those guys against Nikola Jokic. I mean, the chances that they stun Nikola Jokic are very, very, very low. Not many people really expected Rudy Gobert, the Defensive Player of the Year, to be able to stun Jokic, but I mean, he was able to do that in the closeout game rather competently, and in a majority of the playoff games in that series. So Jokic did have that one great game in Game 6 where he dropped, I believe it was like over 40 points or something like that. But again, this is like it's a very difficult task. And when the Defensive Player of the Year, if many people don't think that the Defensive Player of the Year is going to be able to guard Jokic, imagine any of the previous guys that I just mentioned trying to guard Jokic. Now, JJ Redick, he acknowledged earlier in the offseason that the Lakers are looking to add a center, but they will now go into the year without having added a center. And when speaking to the press on Wednesday night, Redick did not really seem too concerned due to Anthony Davis's presence, saying, quote, "I think we have not only one of the best players in the world, but one of the most unique players in the world in Anthony Davis, because there are very few people that can do the things he can do at his size in terms of his ball handling, his skill level offensively, and certainly the fact that he's one of the best defensive players in the world." And JJ Redick continued saying, "I would also say, I don't view Nikola Jokic as a traditional center. I think back to the basket, that's just not the modern NBA. I think we have a gift that we have Anthony Davis. It's not a deterrent that we don't have a 7'2", 300-pound player. I'm not sure that is how we want to play anyways." So I do understand the belief in Anthony Davis. However, I wouldn't necessarily bank it entirely on Anthony Davis, and that's mainly because of his history with injuries. I mean, Anthony Davis, it's very, he literally gets made fun of for being made out of glass and being rather fragile going into a lot of these seasons. And who's to say, I don't really like wishing this onto anyone, but it's still a major concern. Who's to say that he's not going to get injured again? And since the Lakers lack depth at the center position, if Anthony Davis goes out, that could be game over for the Lakers. And honestly, really, if either LeBron or Anthony Davis go out, it's game over, especially LeBron. But Anthony Davis, I mean, again, there's not really all that much depth at the center position. So really figuring out or deciding which one is more valuable for the team, I think right now Anthony Davis is going to end up being a little bit more valuable just because of the fact that there is not really all that much depth at the center position. And that's saying a lot because you guys know I'm a LeBron fan, and everyone knows the value that LeBron brings to a team. Immediately when you put him on a team, they should be title favorites. But that's besides the point. So Redick was also asked about his plan for the center position if Davis is forced to miss time through injury, and this is what he had to say. "That's where you have a package for the different lineups," he added. "That goes back to organization. We're not going to ask Jackson Hayes or Christian Wood when he's healthy to play the same way that Anthony Davis does. So we'll manage," is what he's saying. And that's a very interesting way of looking at it because it shows adaptability. And that's one of the things that I somewhat like about JJ Redick as opposed to Darvin Ham, the ability to adapt and knowing what to do in order to adapt. They understand that they aren't going to get the same production from Christian Wood or Jackson Hayes as they do Anthony Davis. But really, it's how you adapt to that situation and how you end up playing in the future going into a game without Anthony Davis. And I'm very interested to see if that does happen, how they would adapt and how JJ Redick would adapt into certain situations. And it's going to be, it seems like a lot of this is going to be experimental. So that could spell good news or that could spell bad news. But given what the Lakers have received from Darvin Ham from previous coaching experiences, I think taking risks and I'm trying to experiment with your rotations and your roster is a really good start for the Lakers. Don't do it too much, however, because the Nets, I remember when they came into several different games with so many different starting lineups trying to get a rotation to work, and it just ultimately didn't end up working. So it's going to be rather interesting to see how the adapting is with this team and how much they're able to adapt and what they're able to do with all of this. Like, it's going to be an experimented year, definitely. Now, Davis is coming off the healthiest season of his career, but also played for Team USA in the Olympics this summer. So the Lakers may be cautious with the big man to start the year. And that means that guys like Hayes and Koloko will need to step up their game behind Anthony Davis or in his absence, which is not really an ideal matchup when you're going up against Jokic and the Nuggets. So as long as Anthony Davis can remain healthy for the majority of the regular season, they should be fine. They should be fine for the postseason. Again, anything can happen. God forbid LeBron goes out, or God forbid anyone else that's rather important. Honestly, God forbid LeBron goes out. Like, seriously, God forbid LeBron goes out for the Lakers, because if he goes out, I think it's over, and there's nothing that they can do. And about the center, like, that they could be interested in acquiring, I'm not entirely sure, because again, there aren't really that many competent centers like that remaining in free agency. And if they do have to trade, then that's going to be really tough, considering how I believe they're just below the second apron. So again, it's really, really going to be tough trying to acquire pieces if you are the Lakers. And if the Lakers do look into the trade market, a big name is Jonas Valanciunas, and that is an option for the Lakers. And I do think that could increase their depth at the center position. So they did have an interest in signing with him, but then he ended up choosing the Wizards in free agency. And the two sides could still be in talks of potential trade deals, so we'll have to see how the season goes around. I'm almost certain that the Lakers are going to get buzzed around with trade rumors towards the end of the trade deadline, like they always do. I mean, it's like every single trade deadline, the Lakers are like, oh, we're going to trade for this. Oh, we're going to get DeJounte Murray. Oh, we're going to get Kyrie Irving. Oh, we're going to get this and that and the other, and then it ultimately doesn't happen. So that's really all that I have on this segment and the Lakers' really big problem. The biggest problem is the center position, and I know that's saying a lot because you do have Anthony Davis, but again, the lack of depth could be serious. So aside from that, that is it. That is all that I have for this fourth segment. So now we'll go ahead into the special fifth segment, where I look at an article claiming that the Knicks are optimistic about Ben Simmons. And oh my gosh, if you guys have tuned into my podcast before, you already know how I feel about Ben Simmons. So we'll go right into it after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, I'm going to be talking about Ben Simmons and whether or not we should still believe that he has more left in the tank. Because there are a lot of people that think that, Ben Simmons is essentially done and that he shouldn't be in the NBA anymore. And then there's also the small margin of people that still have a little bit of faith in Ben Simmons and his game. So this segment is sort of going to be covering all of that stuff that's been going on with Ben Simmons, because now the Nets, they're trying to remain optimistic with Ben Simmons, and that could either spell good news or bad news, and in my opinion, I think it spells complete and utter bad news. However, there are other sources that claim that the reason why the Nets remain optimistic about Ben Simmons is to hopefully increase his trade value, because the contract that Ben Simmons is working with right now, he's standing at $40.33 million over the next season, which is a lot of money for someone who doesn't play on the court and doesn't play all that many games and has an injury history to back that up. And again, this is like, the Nets are stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they do want to rebuild, but they also want to be able to sort of increase, like, in order to rebuild, they have to sort of get rid of Ben Simmons and try to increase his trade value. And in order to do that, he actually has to play basketball, and he has to play it well. And I just wanted to address this quote that Ben Simmons said a few days ago, actually a day ago, from this CBS article. He said, quote, "I think people forget me as a player when I'm healthy. I can play basketball, and I'm pretty good, right?" I don't even know where to begin with that quote. Sure, you can play basketball, but do you play basketball? No. You've been sitting out for a majority of these seasons. Can you play basketball? That's also a question in of itself, because like, not many people are even sure that Ben Simmons can reach the same level that he had in his rookie year, which should have been his worst year, but ends up being his best year. And the Knicks, they continue remaining optimistic. There are several articles that are saying they're optimistically delusional. Literally, delusional is in quotes over here. That's the article, not me. And again, he recently underwent surgery with no setbacks in his recovery. He's getting encouraged from the organization. And under this optimism does lie the strategy of trying to increase his trade value. But again, that huge contract that he's going to be, and all that money that he's going to be making, it would take a lot for somebody to end up trading for him and expecting some sort of value from him in that contract. Like, that contract is really, really messing up the trades for Ben Simmons. Like, it's really, really messing that up, because you could easily go over into the second apron or into the first apron if you trade for Ben Simmons, depending on like how the trade details work. And again, this is like, I don't even know where to like begin with this, because I don't think the Nets should be optimistic about him whatsoever, and I don't think anybody else should be optimistic about him. Ben Simmons has already shown the player that he is, and he's a player that cracks under the pressure. He's a player that cannot handle scrutiny. He's someone who refuses to shoot the basketball despite teams knowing that he doesn't want to shoot the basketball. It's just like there's a lack of improvement as a player there. And in a league where players are constantly improving and constantly trying to make more money, how can you be all right with just being all right? Does that make, if that makes any sense? Like, that just, and even then you can make the argument that Ben Simmons isn't all right, because he has his problems in of itself already on the offensive side of the ball. Since teams already know that he's afraid of shooting, that takes away a lot of the attention that he's going to draw, not only outside of the arc, that affects his playmaking from outside of the arc as well. And on top of that, when teams know that he's just going to take a layup, then you can easily play back. And teams that have a solid rim protector to guard Ben Simmons are going to have a field day against him. Again, if Ben Simmons is near a fraction of the piece that he was when he was on Philly, you can make that argument. But he's just not. Like, he just hasn't shown any improvement. I don't think there should be any sort of optimism when going into Ben Simmons whatsoever. And the article continues, the front office is well aware that no team is going to take Ben Simmons' contract unless he demonstrates a return to form. And his performance needs to rise to the level where teams view him as an asset, not as a liability, which is what he has been for a very long time in his career. And if the Nets can rehabilitate his value, they could potentially package him in a trade deal for draft picks, or pair him with their own draft equity to acquire a pretty solid all-star. Now, in short, the Nets are betting that a successful rehabilitation of Simmons' game could unlock significant opportunities for their future. And betting on Ben Simmons is not ideal. I'm sorry to say this, but my faith on Ben Simmons is incredibly low. Because every single offseason, we have to see how he plays in the gym. Oh, Ben Simmons is shooting the ball with his left hand now. He's shooting the ball from deep. This is great. This is going to be a great season for Ben Simmons. We saw that for like 3 off seasons, and still he refuses to shoot 3-pointers. And that's a problem, especially now, because teams know that he's passive and he doesn't want to score. Now, during media day, the Nets front office and the coaching staff, and even Simmons himself, struck a positive tone about his readiness for the upcoming season. But really, I don't even think Ben Simmons wants to even play in the next season. I really don't know, like, the situation surrounding Ben Simmons, but it's like, I can't put my trust in this guy. I genuinely cannot. And while there is a bunch of positivity, I think the only reason why there is positivity is because that's what Ben Simmons needs. And we saw how he reacted and we saw how he responded to all the criticism with Philly. He did not, when a player gets criticized by their home team, the way good players, in my opinion at least, good players, what they would do is they would get so much better and like the next season and use that as inspiration to try and be better and to sort of prove people wrong. But Ben Simmons did the exact opposite. He just laid down there and just didn't do anything. And when that just told me everything that I need about to know about Ben Simmons. When he's faced with adversity, he's not going to try and overcome it. And do you really want that as a player? Someone who's do you really want a player who's not going to try and overcome adversity regardless of how tough it is, regardless of how bad the criticism is? Do you really want that as a player that's making $44 million in a year? I don't think so. And I think teams already realize that, and I understand that the contract is an issue, but even then, I wouldn't even give him a minimum contract if that's his attitude to the game. Why would I want a player that doesn't want to face adversity and doesn't want to overcome challenges on my team? That's just a detriment, if anything else. And I cannot go back on it. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, but that's really like my stance on Ben Simmons and just the entire situation going on. I'm not optimistic about Ben Simmons at all. I don't think his trade value is going to increase even in the slightest unless he starts shooting 3-pointers. That's really when his trade value is going to skyrocket, when he starts shooting 3-pointers and he starts making 3-pointers. Because if he doesn't, people are only going to consider him the same player that he was when he left Philly. And that's the gambit. And that's all that I have on this 5th segment, and that's it for the show. Thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. Really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take or a burning question. We are all ears. And if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. Just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, then that's totally fine. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment, gsmcpodcast.net. Send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. And that is all that I have today on this 5th segment. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.